This video is a walkthrough of the PracticeIt website for Chapter 8 on classes. I've got a list of assignments I'd like you guys to do. I'm going to step through all of these. So I'm going to break with tradition, and whereas I've pretty consistently been telling you guys that terminology doesn't matter a whole lot, this time I actually am going to test a lot of terminology because it's really hard to check whether you know these things or not without just asking questions about them. So I'm going to go over each one. What is object-oriented programming? I'm not going to go over the exact options, but remember, object-oriented programming is different than procedural programming because procedural programming, we think about what are the functions that are necessary and oftentimes also think about the data that operate with those functions, versus object-oriented programming, you're looking at what are the objects involved here and what kind of functionality do those objects have. Both the two things are state, which is its data, and the methods. Okay. Next one is what is an object and how is it different from a class? For this, I am going to switch back to Eclipse. So I've got this main program here using the point object, and I've got my point class here. So what's the difference between an object and a class? So this is the class. There's lots of differences. Probably the most critical difference is that the class is a blueprint. Okay, this is a blueprint that is going to be used to create objects of type class. So over here in my main code, when I call new point, this creates an instance from that blueprint. Okay. Other differences, the classes need to be defined in a file by themselves, and typically you're not going to have a main in it because it's just defining a class. The classes, well, then we get into a lot of other things, but that's the main point that this question is asking. So what is an object? Just remember that. Okay, so now they're using the example of a string object. What is the state and behavior of a string object? So we talked about all objects have state, so you have to think about what information is critical to that string object. If you wanted to recreate another string object the same as one that you've used somewhere else, what information is necessary in there? And generally it's the same information that is in the constructor, but sometimes there is more information. It may be computed information, it may be information that's hidden from the user, could be lots of different things, but generally you're looking at what is it constructed with. Second, what's the behavior? So these are the methods. What are the methods that you know about on the string object? That's what it's getting at. Okay, reference mystery. So this is just testing your understanding of a concept that you've seen before with arrays, and that is that when you pass a simple intrinsic type like an integer into a method here, you can do your worst to it in here. Okay, it is not going to change what the value of a is when you return. So whatever the value of a is here, since nobody else changes a, it's still going to be the same here. And b, because nobody changes b here, it's still going to be the same here. This a and this b only exist in this scope here. Whereas if you pass in a point P1, when you pass in a point P1 here, anything you do to P1 will be reflected in the calling routine. That's because P1 is passing in actually a memory address to your object. And then when it gets here, even though it's a copy of that memory address, you could say P1 equals 0, equals null, and that's not going to blow away P1 here. But when you actually access the data in that object, it is that same object. Both this P1, okay, which is a local here, and this P1, which is it's a formal parameter, but really it's exactly the same as having a local here, are pointing to the same object. Okay, so when you change this value here, yes. So now whatever P1.x was, which would have been set here, now whatever it did here is going to be reflected here. And just remember that P2 up till this point has not yet been changed. Okay, but after this line, then P2 will be changed. Okay, and you're just being asked to fill in the blanks here. So the first call here is going to be the value of A, whatever that be. Let's say it's 0 space, and then whatever the value of this here is. Let's say it's 0. Okay, and then over here there's actually going to be 4 numbers, etc. like that. Okay, the next one. This is testing whether you kind of get the idea of how to create an object, what state and data are. So if you have a calculator, now there could be lots of different interpretations of how this works, but I want you to think about a calculator that you're holding in your hand, you're doing something with it, and you want a friend to have the exact same state as what the calculator you've got in your hand. Say he's got the same model. What information does he need to know in order for his instance of the calculator to be able to calculate the same functions? Okay, think about it like that. And then think about what methods can you both execute on a calculator. What is a field? Okay, so what's the difference between a field and a parameter? For this, let me again go back to Eclipse. So we're just going to look at the point class now. So these are fields here. Okay, field here, field here. These are parameters here. Okay, so some of the differences, so the fields are instantiated for every single object. When you create an object, every object has these fields and they hold data. These parameters here, these are really local variables to this particular method. So initial x only exists within this particular method, whereas x and y are available throughout this entire class. It can be used anywhere. And because I've declared them as private, they're only available within this class. Back here in the main routine, you cannot call p.x equals 5. That won't work because these say private. Also, while we're talking about these special keywords, you notice that none of these, we always used to say public, static, something, and then method name. Okay, why is it we're not using static? So static, what static means is that it is independent of needing to actually create a new object. Static means that there's no state associated with it. So if I had a method here that had nothing to do with this data here, say I just, I'm not sure, maybe you had some special point, I don't know, maybe some special calculation that was independent of what the x and y values are, then I could create a static method. Well, like suppose, I don't know, just suppose I wanted to provide a square root function, okay? That square root function, which has nothing to do with the x and y, it's just, it takes one parameter and returns the square root of it. That has nothing to do with anything, and so I would call it a public static, probably a double square root, okay? That is where you use the static. But because all of these rely on actually calling the, that's another way of thinking about it, is static methods don't rely on the constructors, okay? So static methods are available on the point class without calling the constructor. So if I had, let's do that, public static double square root of double x, and this is the value is going to be return math dot square root of x. Okay, so I've declared this as a static. Now what I can do is over here I can say double d equals, now I need to use the point class dot, see there it pops right up, square root of 625. Okay, so that is what the static is. I think we've explained everything that was confusing at first. So what's public? Public is whether it's visible outside or not. As another example, let's suppose that I made this, I need something that I'm actually using here. We're using setX, right? So what happens if I change setX from public to private? Okay, there we go. The error popped up. It says method setX is not visible. Okay, so that's public. It's whether you can see it outside the function or not. Public, we talked about static. So static functions don't depend on calling the constructor. They don't depend on the values on your fields. Void, the return type. We've talked a lot about what the return types are. Remember that for constructors, there are no return types. And then the method name. Okay, sorry, that was maybe too much of a distraction. That was just a question of what's a field versus a parameter. Constructors. So here they want you to create a constructor that takes point as a parameter and initializes a new point to the same value. Okay, so that's a little bit different. You're actually going to pass in, so in your parens here, you're actually going to pass in a, I'll give you the header. No, I won't give you the header. I want you to figure that out. But you're going to accept a point, okay? And let's go back to Eclipse. So part of the instructions was use the keyword this. Well, let's tackle that one first. That's simpler. Okay, so here's an example of using this. Okay, and actually a lot of people would say you should always use this dot whenever you're referring to your fields, so it's very clear as to what things are. But you can use this dot wherever you see x. You could have used this dot x. Okay, and so they're saying they want a constructor instead of an int x and y. They're going to take a point. Okay, and then they want you to set the x from the x value of the point that's passed in. So remember, we're inside the class, and so we have full access to the data. We don't have to use getX and getY within it. And maybe I haven't gone over that enough. But you do not have to use getX and getY inside this class. Even though these fields up here are private, okay, it still means it's totally visible within the class. Feel free to use the X value within the class. Okay, so that introduces some new stuff we haven't seen before. And then the last question, this is really asking you to do the whole shebang for a class called line. Okay, a line is determined by 2 points. And then we have to do a get p1, p2, and return public toString. And that, let me go back to Eclipse. This is very similar to this class, but slightly different. Okay. So they want a line instead of a point here. Instead of an x and a y, guess what? You're going to have your constructor for the line, I believe, takes 2 points. So that is the state that you want. You want 2 points here, okay? And you should make them private. So instead of int, it's a point, and then create two names. It just doesn't really matter what. And then they wanted you to do get p1 and get p2. It's just like x and y. Okay, you're just going to return those objects. And then the toString, similar to here. So you're just generating a string that's going to print out. In this case, it only had to print an x and a y. In your case, you're going to have to print out 4 values. And if you are sick of typing out plus signs, you might also look up the function string.format. Okay, string.format is the same as printf, but it doesn't actually print anything. It just, let's see what happens. So it's, you can do %d, here I can show you. That's not quite right. Quote, open bracket, %d, comma, %d, close bracket, quote. Then I need 2 arguments here. For, let's say in the case of a point, it would be x and y. So I can do all sorts of fancy things in here, and it's a little bit shorter than doing that. Okay, but let's get rid of that. Go back to the question. So this week we've just really covered the basics of classes. Okay, just the syntax of how, what is a class? A class is a data abstraction. It consists of your fields, which is your state, and then it consists of methods, which consist of 3 different classes: constructors like this, and then mutators and accessors like these. So, we're just doing a very simple example here. We haven't yet covered the real advantages of object-oriented programming because we haven't done anything significant. But that's really the purpose of Chapter 8 and 142, is just to introduce you to those concepts so you understand how to do the basics. 143 will continue on and show you a better example of why you use classes and how it can help you. So that is the whole of the assignment. So hopefully that will go well for you.